The rain had been falling for hours, turning the long driveway into a ribbon of wet, glistening stone. The old Henderson estate stood like a monument to wealth and pride, its white columns glistening under the soft flicker of the porch light. Inside, the air smelled faintly of cedar and expensive perfume. Margaret Henderson paced the marble foyer, her silk gown brushing the floor with each turn. In her arms, she held a newborn, tiny, fragile, and crying softly. The baby's skin was darker than hers, darker than her husband's, and that simple truth gnawed at her in ways she didn't fully understand. When Richard Henderson entered the room, his face was pale and unreadable. He had just come from the study where the family doctor's words still hung in the air like smoke. The boy is healthy, but he doesn't look like you. They didn't say it aloud, but the thought was there, heavy and poisonous. Richard stepped closer, peered down at his son, and his jaw tightened. "Margaret," he said quietly, "you know how this will look. Our name, our standing in the community." Her eyes filled with tears, but she said nothing. In the dining room, their 10-year-old daughter, Emily, peeked around the corner. She didn't understand why her parents were whispering, but she could feel the tension in the air, sharp like the edge of broken glass. That night, the decision was made without discussion. Before dawn, a black town car pulled into the long driveway. A maid carried the child, wrapped in a thick blanket, to the waiting car. Richard stood in the shadows of the porch, hands in his pockets, eyes fixed on the gravel. Margaret didn't come out to watch. The driver never said a word. Miles away, on the edge of the city, he stopped at St. Mary's Orphanage, a tall gray building with peeling paint and a rusted gate. The baby was handed over with nothing but a birth certificate and a note that read, "No family." Inside the orphanage, Sister Agnes took the child in her arms. She was used to receiving babies in the dead of night, but this one had eyes that wouldn't look away. They were deep, searching, as if he already understood he had been left behind. Years passed. The boy, named Daniel by the nuns, grew up knowing little about where he came from. He was quiet, observant, the kind of child who didn't cry much but seemed to carry a question in his heart that no one could answer. Meanwhile, life in the Henderson estate went on. Emily grew into a poised young woman, inheriting her mother's elegance and her father's sharp mind. No one in their social circle ever knew about the child who had once cried in the marble foyer. To the world, the Hendersons were perfect. But perfection has cracks, and some cracks are deep enough to swallow the truth whole. One autumn evening, 14 years after that rainy night, the Hendersons began packing their belongings. The estate had been sold. Richard claimed they wanted something smaller, closer to the city. The truth was more complicated. Boxes filled the halls, chandeliers were wrapped in cloth, and their laughter echoed through empty rooms. The morning they were to leave, the air was heavy with the smell of wet leaves. They loaded into the car, Richard at the wheel, Margaret beside him, Emily in the back seat. Their route wound through the back roads, past fields, and into the dense stretch of blackwood forest. They never made it out. The official report said it was an accident, that Richard had lost control on a slippery curve, that the car had slammed into an old oak. But the broken glass, the missing valuables, and the lack of skid marks told a different story. Someone had been waiting for them in the dark. Someone who knew their route, their habits, and their worth. When the police finally cleared the scene, the Hendersons' home and fortune were left in the hands of their closest relative, Charles Henderson, a man who had always resented Richard's success and believed the fortune should have been his. And so the estate changed hands. The rooms were refurnished, the portraits taken down, the air thick with the scent of a different family. Daniel, somewhere across the city, swept floors in a mechanic's shop, unaware that the house he once lived in, for only a few hours of his life, was now owned by the man who had stolen everything from his blood. Daniel wiped the sweat from his brow and leaned on the broom handle. The garage smelled of oil and old metal, a place where engines coughed and roared back to life under calloused hands. It wasn't glamorous, but it was work, steady, honest work that paid enough for rent and a few simple meals. He was 20 now, tall, lean, with dark hair that curled slightly at the edges. His eyes, the same deep, searching eyes Sister Agnes had seen on the night he was abandoned, often wandered toward the world beyond his small apartment. He never quite knew why, but he always felt something was missing, like there was a thread tied around his heart, leading somewhere he couldn't see. That evening, as he locked up the shop, his boss, Mr. Riley, tossed him a small envelope. Got a side job for you, kid. Easy cash. Couple hours tops. Daniel opened the envelope. Inside was a crisp note with an address in the wealthy part of town, Blackwood Lane. The name meant nothing to him, but he'd never been to that neighborhood. The next morning, he took the bus across the city. The air smelled different there, fresh, clean, carrying the faint sweetness of trimmed hedges and rose gardens. The houses were huge, silent, almost intimidating. He found the address easily. A tall wrought iron gate, flanked by stone pillars, opened to a long driveway lined with oak trees. The house at the end stood proud, its white columns gleaming in the sunlight. A woman in her 40s answered the door. She had sharp eyes, the kind that saw everything but said little. "You're here for the cleaning?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am," Daniel replied. Inside, the air was cool and faintly scented with lavender. The floors shone, the walls were adorned with heavy frames, and the silence seemed almost deliberate. The woman handed him a small list of rooms to tidy up. Daniel worked quietly, moving from room to room. In the library, dust clung to the edges of tall shelves. As he wiped the highest corners, his cloth brushed against a small framed photograph half hidden behind a row of books. He froze. The photo showed a man, a woman, and a young girl, smiling in front of a house that looked exactly like this one. But it wasn't the girl or the parents that caught his attention. It was the baby in the mother's arms. The baby's skin was a shade darker than the rest. The eyes, they were his. Daniel's pulse quickened. He set the frame down carefully, hands trembling. For a moment, the world around him seemed to fade. He needed air. Stepping into the hallway, he noticed a door at the far end, slightly ajar. Something about it pulled at him. He pushed it open and found a small, dusty room, empty except for an old dresser. Above it, mounted on the wall, was a tiny security camera, long dead, its red light faded. Curious, he opened the dresser drawers. Inside, wrapped in yellowed paper, was a stack of VHS tapes, each labeled with dates from 20 years ago. His hands shook as he picked one up. Later that night in his small apartment, Daniel borrowed an old player from his neighbor and slid the tape in. The screen flickered to life. Static. Then, the image of the Henderson foyer, bathed in warm light. A woman in a silk gown, a man in a dark suit, and in her arms, a baby, swaddled in a blanket. The baby was crying, the man's face was cold, the woman's eyes wet with something that looked like guilt. Then a maid entered, took the baby, and walked out the door. Daniel's breath caught, his throat tightened. He was watching the night he had been left behind. The date on the corner of the tape read, October 14th, 2005. His hands clenched into fists. He didn't know who the people in the video were, but he knew one thing. They had been his family. And someone, somewhere, had decided he wasn't worth keeping. He didn't sleep that night. Instead, he made a list. Names, clues, questions. And at the top of the page, written in shaky letters, were 3 words: find the truth. The sun had barely risen when Daniel stepped out of his apartment. He hadn't slept. The streets were quiet, the city still shaking off the cold breath of dawn. His list of names and questions was folded neatly in his jacket pocket, as though the paper itself could keep him steady. He didn't know where to start, but he knew one thing. Answers don't just show up. You go after them. The first clue came from the tapes. On one of them, in the background of the Henderson living room, he had spotted a tall man with silver hair and a scar across his jaw. The man wasn't family. The way he moved, the way he glanced toward the camera, it was different, controlled. Daniel spent the morning at the city archives, flipping through public records. Hours passed. His stomach growled. Finally, in a faded newspaper clipping from October 2005, he found him. Local businessman involved in charity gala scandal. Name, Victor Hale. No mention of the Hendersons, but the dates matched. Victor Hale. The name rolled in Daniel's mind like a stone in a jar. He wrote it down. That evening, Daniel returned to Blackwood Lane. This time, he wasn't there to clean. He stood across the street watching the Henderson house. Lights glowed in the upper windows. Through the sheer curtains, shadows moved. 2 figures, maybe 3. Then a black sedan pulled into the driveway. A man stepped out. Even from this distance, Daniel recognized the scar. Victor Hale. Daniel's pulse pounded in his ears. He ducked behind a parked van, heart racing. Hale rang the doorbell, and the sharp-eyed woman from before opened it. They spoke briefly before disappearing inside. Why would Victor Hale still be visiting the Henderson home after all these years? Daniel waited until the lights on the second floor dimmed. Then he crossed the street. The side gate wasn't locked. Every step up the driveway felt heavier than the last. He wasn't just trespassing. He was walking into a place that had thrown him away. Inside the garage, he spotted something covered in a dusty tarp. Pulling it back revealed a vintage car, the kind that belonged in a magazine spread. But it wasn't the car that made his breath catch. It was the broken windshield. And in the passenger seat, wedged between the cracked leather and the door, was a rusted bracelet, the kind given to newborns in hospitals. The tag was worn, but the faint lettering was still visible. Baby Boy H. Daniel's chest tightened. His hands shook as he picked it up. It wasn't proof in a courtroom sense, but it was proof to him. Somewhere in this house, the truth was rotting under layers of lies. He needed someone who could help him dig it out. The next day, Daniel visited an old friend from the garage. Miguel, a quiet guy with a knack for finding things people wanted hidden. He laid out the bracelet, the tape, and the photograph. Miguel studied them, his expression unreadable. "You sure you want to open this door, hermano? Once you start, there's no shutting it." Daniel nodded. "They left me to disappear. I'm not disappearing." Miguel sighed, then scribbled an address on a piece of paper. "Start here. It's where Hale does his side business. But be careful. People who work with him, they don't forgive curiosity." Daniel took the paper. The address was in the industrial district, a place where the streets turned quiet at night and the shadows had sharp edges. He slipped the bracelet into his pocket and walked out into the fading light, unaware that the moment he stepped onto that street, someone was already watching him. The industrial district had its own kind of silence. Not the peaceful kind, the kind that weighed on your skin. Old brick warehouses stood shoulder to shoulder, their windows cracked, their walls tattooed with years of neglect. The air smelled faintly of oil and rust. Daniel's boots crunched against gravel as he followed the address Miguel had given him. A flickering street lamp lit the corner of Pearson 9th, where a faded sign read, "Hale Logistics." It was nearly dark, and the only sound came from a slow, mechanical hum somewhere inside. Daniel hesitated, feeling the small weight of the hospital bracelet in his pocket. This was more than a clue now. It was a line between the life he had and the one stolen from him. He pushed the door open. Inside, the place was bigger than it looked. A single desk sat in the middle of the floor, papers scattered across it. To the left, stacks of shipping crates towered toward the ceiling. The hum was louder here, vibrating through the metal walls. "Can I help you?" The voice came from behind a crate. A man stepped out, tall, broad-shouldered, with eyes like polished stone. He wasn't Hale. Daniel cleared his throat. "I'm here about a job." The man studied him, suspicion creeping into his expression. "Miguel send you?" Daniel didn't answer right away. "Maybe. I was told to come here." The man's jaw tightened. He walked over, close enough that Daniel could smell cigarette smoke on his jacket. "If Miguel sent you, you know the rules? No questions. You work, you get paid, you keep your mouth shut." Daniel nodded slowly. "Understood." The man led him toward the back, where a row of crates stood half open. Inside, Daniel caught sight of, not goods, not merchandise, but boxes filled with documents, property deeds, bank transfers, photographs. And then he saw it, a framed family picture buried beneath a stack of papers. The Hendersons. Daniel froze, his eyes locked on the image. Hale stood beside them, smiling like he belonged. Daniel's stomach turned. The man noticed. "Something wrong?" Daniel forced a breath. "No, just wondering what's in all these boxes." The man's stare lingered a little too long. "Like I said, no questions." They worked in silence for the next hour, moving crates from one side of the warehouse to the other. Daniel kept his head down, but his mind was racing. If these documents were here, this place wasn't just a business front. It was where Hale kept his leverage. When the shift ended, Daniel slipped the family photo under his jacket. He barely made it to the street before he heard footsteps behind him. Forget something? It was the same man. His face was shadowed, but his tone was cold. Daniel's pulse spiked. He tried to play it off. "No, just heading home." The man took a step closer. "Be careful, new guy. Around here, curiosity isn't healthy." Daniel forced a half smile and walked away, the photo burning against his ribs. But what he didn't see was the phone in the man's hand and the short message he typed before slipping it into his pocket. He knows. The night was colder than it had any right to be. Daniel's breath clouded in the air as he walked back toward his small apartment. Every shadow felt closer than it should. Every footstep behind him stretched too long. By the time he reached his building, he knew he wasn't alone. The man from the warehouse stood across the street, leaning casually against a lamppost, smoking like the cold didn't touch him. His eyes didn't blink. They didn't need to. Daniel didn't go inside right away. He stood there, his hand on the doorknob, pretending not to notice. But then the man spoke. "You should come with me." Daniel hesitated. "Why?" "No why. Just come." Everything in Daniel screamed not to, but there was no point in running, not now. A black SUV waited at the corner. The back door opened without anyone touching it. Inside, the air smelled like leather and faint cologne. Daniel slid in. Across from him sat a man he'd only seen in pictures. Smooth gray suit, perfectly tied tie, gold watch that caught the streetlights. His smile was calm, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Hale," Daniel said quietly. "You know me," Hale replied, almost pleased. "That saves us time." Daniel gripped the family photo inside his jacket. "You were with them." "My family." Hale tilted his head. "Your family?" Daniel's voice sharpened. "Don't play dumb. I know what you did." The SUV started moving. Hale didn't look away from him. Not once. With "Careful with accusations, son. The world doesn't run on truth. It runs on proof, and you have nothing." Daniel leaned forward. "I'll get proof." Hale finally smiled, a slow, deliberate thing. "Then you'd better hurry. People who look for the past have a bad habit of disappearing before they find it." The car stopped in front of Daniel's building. Hale didn't get out. "Go home, Daniel. Forget what you think you know. You might live longer." Daniel stepped out into the cold night, his legs shaking. The SUV disappeared into the darkness. Inside, the photo felt heavier now. Not because it was evidence, but because it had a face. A face that just told him he wouldn't survive the truth. Daniel didn't sleep that night. Every time he closed his eyes, Hale's voice played back, low and certain. "Forget what you think you know." By morning, the city felt different, quieter, like someone had turned the volume down on the world. He left his apartment early, walking aimlessly until he ended up near the old railway station, a place most people avoided. The brick walls were covered in graffiti, the ground littered with broken glass. That's when he saw her. A woman in a dark coat stood at the far end of the alley, half hidden in shadow. She watched him with a focus that made his skin prickle. "Daniel Hale?" she called softly. He froze. "Who's asking?" She stepped forward, the light catching her face, sharp features, tired eyes, hair pulled back in a messy knot. "Name's Riley. I knew your parents." The words hit him like a punch. "You're lying," he said. Riley shook her head. "I worked for them. Before Hale." She glanced around, lowering her voice. "I know what happened that night, and I know who made it happen." Daniel's heart pounded. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you're still alive, which means Hale doesn't think you're a threat. Yet." She handed him a small flash drive. "Everything I've collected in 10 years. Bank records, property transfers, police reports they buried. Enough to make him nervous." Daniel stared at it. "If it's enough, why didn't you go to the cops?" Riley gave a humorless smile. "You think they're clean? Hale's got people everywhere. You take this to the wrong person and you disappear." Before Daniel could respond, footsteps echoed down the alley. Heavy, deliberate. Riley's eyes widened. "They found us." She pushed the drive into his hand. "Run. Don't look back." Daniel ran. The shouts behind him grew louder, the sound of boots closing in. He turned a corner, ducked into a side street, and kept running until his lungs burned. When he finally stopped, he realized the flash drive was still clutched in his fist. It was proof. Maybe not enough to bring Hale down today, but enough to start. And somewhere behind him, Riley was gone. Daniel didn't go home. Home wasn't safe anymore. Instead, he ducked into an all-night diner on the edge of town, the kind of place where no one asked questions, and the coffee tasted like it had been sitting for hours. He slid into a booth, ordered nothing, and pulled out his old laptop from his backpack. The flash drive felt small in his palm, too small to hold the kind of answers he'd been chasing for years. But when he plugged it in, the screen lit up with folders. Each one was labeled with a date. The earliest was from 19 years ago. Daniel opened the first. It wasn't just documents. There were photographs. His parents smiling in their kitchen. His sister holding him as a baby. All of them candid, natural, taken by someone who knew them well. He kept scrolling. The images started to change. His parents shaking hands with men in suits, meetings in restaurants, large cash deposits in foreign accounts. And then he saw it, a video file dated 2 days before the accident. He clicked play. The camera was shaky, maybe hidden in a bag. His father sat at a table in a dimly lit room, speaking to someone just out of frame. His voice was urgent. "They're moving against us. Hale is making his play. If anything happens to me, keep Daniel away from him. Promise me." The unseen man nodded. "I promise." The video ended abruptly. Daniel's chest felt tight. His father had known. The accident wasn't a surprise, it was a countdown, and somehow Hale had been the one holding the clock. Before he could process more, the bell above the diner door rang. 2 men walked in, black coats, no food in their hands. Their eyes swept the room until they landed on him. Daniel yanked the drive out and shoved it into his pocket. The men started walking toward him. He didn't wait. He bolted for the back exit, shoving through the kitchen and into the freezing night. Behind him, the cook yelled something, but Daniel didn't hear. All he could hear was his father's voice. "Keep Daniel away from him, promise me." And now Hale knew he hadn't stayed away. Daniel didn't stop running until his legs felt like lead. Snow crunched under his shoes, his breath coming in short bursts. He had no plan, no destination, just the instinct to get as far from those men as possible. The streets grew emptier, the houses older. A flickering streetlight revealed a small repair shop at the corner, its neon sign half burnt. Rogers Clockworks. He pushed the door open. The air inside smelled of oil and dust. Clocks of every shape and size ticked in uneven rhythms, the sound almost hypnotic. Behind the counter, an old man looked up from a disassembled pocket watch. "You look like you've been chased by the devil himself," the man said, his voice gravelly. Daniel hesitated. "I just need a place to sit for a minute." The old man gestured to a stool. "Sit, but don't bleed on my floor." Daniel sat, trying to calm his breathing. He glanced at the shelves, all filled with clocks, some missing hands, some frozen mid-tick. "You're Daniel Hale, aren't you?" the man asked without looking up. Daniel's pulse jumped. "How do you know my name?" The man smiled faintly. "I knew your father, long before he crossed paths with the snake that runs this city." "Hale?" Daniel's voice was sharp. The man nodded. "Name's Jack Rogers. Used to be his partner, until he betrayed me. Took everything I had." He set the watch down, meeting Daniel's eyes. "I've been waiting for someone who hates him as much as I do." Daniel swallowed. "I don't just hate him. I want to end him." Jack leaned forward. "Then you'll need more than anger. You'll need to know how he thinks, how he moves. I've been watching him for 20 years. Every deal, every payoff, every weak point. I've got it all." Daniel felt the weight of the flash drive in his pocket. "I've got something too. Something that proves he killed my parents." Jack's eyes lit up, not with joy, but with the grim satisfaction of a man who'd been sharpening a knife for decades. "Then we might just have a fighting chance," Jack said. Before Daniel could reply, a clock on the far wall chimed midnight, and in the same moment the shop's front window shattered. 3 men in dark coats stepped through the glass. Jack didn't flinch. He reached under the counter and pulled out a shotgun. "Stay behind me, kid." Glass crunched under Daniel's shoes as he stumbled back, shielding his face. The cold night air rushed through the shattered front window, carrying the scent of dust and city smoke into the tiny watch shop. 3 figures stepped through the broken glass. Black coats, boots that made no sound on the floor. One of them carried a pistol with a silencer. The other 2 had knives glinting under the dim light. Jack didn't hesitate. The old man's shotgun roared, the sound deafening in the cramped room. One attacker flew backward into the display ways, shards of glass raining down. The other 2 scattered, ducking behind shelves. Daniel's heart pounded. His father's voice echoed in his head. "Keep Daniel away from him, promise me." But staying away wasn't an option anymore. Jack barked, "Back room, now!" Daniel ran, weaving between toppled chairs and broken glass. He pushed through the heavy wooden door to the storage room, slamming it shut behind him. The muffled sound of a struggle carried through the walls. 2 gunshots, then silence. His pulse thudded in his ears. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the flash drive, the only proof of Hale's crimes. If they caught him now, it would disappear forever. The storage door creaked open. Daniel froze. It wasn't Jack. The man in the doorway was tall, lean, and wore a faint smile that didn't reach his eyes. A faint scar ran from his left eyebrow down to his cheek. "Daniel," he said softly, as if greeting an old friend, "you've caused me quite a bit of trouble." Daniel didn't need to ask his name. This was Hale. Hale stepped into the dimly lit storage room, his boots making slow, deliberate taps on the wooden floor. Daniel's grip tightened around the flash drive in his pocket. The air felt heavy, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. "You've got something of mine," Hale said, his voice calm, almost conversational. "Hand it over and maybe I let you walk out of here." Daniel's mind raced. He thought of his parents, of the night they died. He thought of the years spent in shadows, piecing together every detail, chasing whispers until they led him here. Jack's voice cut through the tension. "Step away from him, Hale." Hale turned. Jack stood in the doorway. Shotgun raised, blood on his shirt, but eyes steady. "You're supposed to be dead," Hale muttered. "Guess I'm not very good at following orders," Jack replied. The moment hung, silent and sharp. Then Hale lunged. The room erupted in chaos, the crack of the shotgun, the clatter of shelves falling, Daniel diving to the floor. Smoke and dust filled the air. When it cleared, Hale lay on the ground, the flash drive clutched in Daniel's trembling hand. Jack limped forward, placing a hand on Daniel's shoulder. "It's over, kid." But Daniel shook his head. "No, it's just starting. People need to know the truth." 2 months later, news channels across the country carried the story. The Hale Corporation was dismantled, its executives arrested. Daniel's parents' names were cleared, and for the first time in years, he could walk the streets without looking over his shoulder. He stood outside the shop, now his own, and looked up at the fading evening sky. "This one's for you, Mom." "Dad," he whispered. Like and subscribe.